Good morning. And hopefully the microphone is working this morning. Um, I've come on a little bit early today just to see if it works. The only thing is according to this, I'm not sure it's working that well, but let's see. Right. Hopefully you can hear me quite well, and that the microphone is working. But I can only hope, because technology is a bit of a strange thing. So as long as you can hear me nice and loud and clear, I have no idea why the microphone's been playing up. It didn't work on Sunday. It didn't work on Thursday, and I can't find uh, why or why that is. It's the gremlins. Um, Hopefully, that's why I've come on a little bit earlier. Let's see. It's not very loud. Well, I don't know why that is. It's a very strange thing. Can't think why that is. Um, let's see if this works a little bit better. Uh, so let's see if I can make it a little bit louder. Any louder? Hopefully, it's a little bit better. I cannot think what has happened. But anyway, it's 11 o'clock, and we are here for the webinar, and we're going to talk about love. Before we begin, I'd just like to read this. It's a hymn, and you know this one well. Come down, O love divine, seek thou this soul of mine, and visit it with thine own ardour glowing. O Comforter, draw near, within my heart appear, and kindle it thy holy flame bestowing. You know it well. I thought I'd talk about love because it's such a central feature of the Christian life. There's nothing more central, really, to the Christian life than love. But let me just give you a brief history of love. Well, there isn't enough time even for a brief history, but this is an extremely abridged version. The first person in the sort of Western culture to really write about love was Plato, and he wrote a book called, if I remember rightly, Lysis. And it's a theme that he explores about what is love, and more particularly, what is friendship. There are different kinds of love. And in today's world, the word love is a very elastic word. It means lots of things, and we often have a kind of a rather sort of monoglot kind of view of it, and we tend to think of love in purely sentimental terms or emotional terms. So, uh, but let's start at the beginning. So, when Plato writes about love, way back, 2,500 years ago, what he wants to do is to try and pin down what are the elements, what are the essential elements of what is love? Why do we experience it? Where does it come from? And all these kinds of questions. Now, he's not the first person to think about love, friendship, all that kind of stuff. I think the first person that really begins is Pythagoras, who was a bit of a strange man. He had an odd fascination with bees for some reason, and he had lots of odd habits. But he is classed as the first philosopher, the first one to really think about things. Anyway, moving on from that. So the whole thing about Pythagoras was what he wanted to know with is what it was that made communities congeal. What is it that makes society? And for him, it was very much sort of, there's something woven within the fabric of life that makes us cling to each other, cleave to each other. And Plato sort of runs with this idea of what it is that draws people together, affection, all that kind of stuff. There's an interesting story in Plato's Symposium, and it kind of tells you, it's an interesting book. And basically, it's a book about a gathering of a people at a meal, and they celebrate. They gather to celebrate the god Eros, which is a sort of a passionate love. And during the course of the meal, they have these kind of speeches. That's what the symposium is all about. And the first speech is in honor of love. And the question sort of unfolds is, why is it people feel incomplete? Why is it they feel sort of divided against themselves, sometimes at a loss of themselves? Why does life seem so sort of estranging? And why is it we seek a kind of fulfillment in others? And why is that? Why so this sort of teases out the sort of questions about what it is that attracts people to each other and all that sort of thing. And Plato's answer is that, this is a long way back, mind, is that people were actually divided by the gods. So it's at some point in history, he explains this in terms of that human beings were divided. They had 4 legs and 4 arms, and the gods split them down the middle. And that's why human beings feel a sense of self-isolation, incompleteness. And what draws us to other people that we find is we find the kind of other part of ourselves that was missing, that's been missing. So we always strive to find the other half of ourselves. Yeah. So that's the central idea. And that idea persists, doesn't it? There's a famous film, I think it's called Jerry Maguire, Tom Cruise, and he comes out with that classic sort of Plato's view of love when he says to her, "You complete me." Remember that phrase? You complete me. That's very much rooted in that kind of idea. And that idea that we find the person in life that completes us. And so that's Plato's idea of what it is we're looking for in life. We're looking for the other half of ourselves. And we say that in phrases, don't we? When we say, "Oh, ask the other half." Yeah. So that's where those ideas come from Plato. And we use those phrases all the time, and we use those ideas stay with us, and there's all that kind of stuff. So that, I think that's kind of at the root of when we talk about love. That's kind of always there, the foundation of some sort of completing force that's drawing us to become more of ourselves. Okay. Now, he's not the only one to talk about love. I should caveat this by saying, actually, in the ancient world, ideas of romantic love were vague. They real there was an understanding of what we may call passionate love, lust, where two people meet and are overcome by each other. There's that idea, but romantic love doesn't really feature as a theme until we get to the medieval period, really. It's not that idea of a kind of willing exchange, whereas in the ancient world, it's very much relationships between men and women were very contractual, very sort of prescribed, and that was the way it was. I mean, even in the 5th century, it was illegal for women of low birth, of the slave class, to marry or have relations outside, or to marry outside of their social group. In fact, I'm not even sure when slaves were allowed to marry. But for example, if you hooked up with somebody who was of a different social background, it could be that you may not be allowed to get married. That may not be possible. And it's all to do with property and status and all that kind of stuff. So that really sort of stifled the sort of notions of romantic love. Incidentally, St. Augustine, have I mentioned him? He had a relationship with probably a slave woman for about 13, 14 years. They weren't allowed to marry. She was his common law wife, really. And but he does talk about her in very affectionate terms, the only woman that possessed my heart, all that kind of stuff. So we're starting to see with Augustine the kind of the beginnings of a sentimentality about love. It was there before, but not as sort of explicit. And then, of course, we get into the later period in Europe. Dante's Inferno, the writings of Dante, and you get more sort of an idea of a romantic kind of thing, and you get the whole idea of knights and chivalry and maidens in need of rescue and all that kind of stuff. And you also, you get the classic one that we all know is the story of King Arthur, which actually, if you know the story of King Arthur, it's a medieval story. It's not. It doesn't come from that early. It's a medieval story, and largely it's fiction. I mean, there are probably some historical facts to the story of King Arthur, but it's far removed, really. The time we get to hear about it, it's a story about a young boy who's robbed of his heritage, and destiny, elevates him, and then he finds his love, Guinevere, and all that sort of, that's what the story's about, really. It's a love story that goes kind of wrong. And but it's in the medieval period, you get this idea of this kind of romantic kind of notion of what love is all about. And then we sort of move on in history, get to the sort of, I don't know, the sort of age that we're in now. And you know, it's all changed, isn't it? You start, you know, there's lots of sort of romantic elements to life, and um, yeah, so we still stick with that sort of romantic flavor. However, the big change, I think, in the story of what we may call love, I think happens around the 1950s and 60s, and you get the sort of free love movement. I'll get onto that, but it calls itself that, in which what it means to be a lover of love itself is to abandon oneself completely to one's passions and indiscretions. So you get this kind of, I think, in the 60s and that, yes, people talk about it in, you know, it's all fun and all that, but I think you do get, I think I look at it really as a period of an abusive love. It's it's an interesting thing. Yeah. So it's a bit of a scatty picture, and we're still sort of living out the effects of that kind of free love movement, um, in which kind of love becomes very much confused with desire, uh, and it's all about what you want. It's not really about what you should have. Now, anyway, that's a sort of a very brief potted history of the development of that word that we have called love. um, I love that song by Johnny Cash when he says it's 6'4". He stood from the ground. He weighed 235 pounds, but that giant of a man brought down to his knees by love. um, and what you convey in that is the absolute sort of power of this indescribable, mysterious, and inexplicable force that you know and I know, and yet it cannot be measured or cannot be contained. What is love? I remember as a young boy watching Top of the Pops and thinking, they're all singing about love. And it's just one of those things, isn't it? It's completely knowable and unknowable at the same time. I think that's why at the beginning, like philosophers thought, oh, we'll try and figure this out, you know. What is this thing called love? Um, yeah. So there you go. Just to go back though, I just want to look at some certain words. There are certain words for love in the ancient world. Like today, we have one word, don't we? Love. But actually, the development of the words for love are a lot more sort of complicated, really, and a lot more descriptive. Because what we've done in history, we've taken a lot of words about love and we've lumped them all together in one word, love. In the ancient world, they had different words for different kinds of love. Okay, so so if we look at the Greek, there's phileo, which is more like a brotherly love. Yeah, or actually, it's more related to friends. Okay, loosely, and then there's another word for love, which is storage. Doesn't get used very much, and there's not much to say about that. It's one of those words. Another word for love is eros. We've heard about that, haven't we? The symposium. Now we have a bit of a strange view of this word, eros, and this is quite sort of indicative of our age. That we think of eros is strictly in sort of sexual self-abandonment terms. Eros is erotic. Is where we get that word. But actually, that's in itself a perversion of that term, because in the ancient world, it didn't really just mean that. What it really meant was passionate love. So it wasn't explicitly related to sex. It was something that was passionate. So you could be a gardener infused with eros. You could be, it was just one of those passionate loves. It was one of those driving loves. But we, in our age, we kind of sexualize everything. But it wasn't about that. And actually, Eros in Greek mythology is one of the oldest of the gods, and was the patron god of Socrates. So it tells you that actually at the height of what it is to think is the patron of love. That's the kind of idea. So we have a bit of a strange idea of Eros. Agape. We hear a lot about agape. Now, agape is not a very common phrase in Greek literature. Agape, you've all probably heard of this. Agape means unbridled love, or extravagant love, unrelenting love. That's probably a good way to put it. It's an unrelenting love. It's not a love that can be sort of caveated by anything. So agape is very much sort of the sort of love that you have for, like, a child. Whether you love them or not is not dependent upon whether you like them at certain periods of, it doesn't change. It's a constant, unrelenting, and abundant love, which expects nothing in return. That's agape. So you have different words for different kinds of love. A classic example of this is in the New Testament, but I'll just say a little bit about the New Testament. In the New Testament, agape is the dominant phrase for love, which is very odd because in classical Greek literature, it's used very rarely. So in the New Testament, it's used frequently to make a point. And the reason it's used frequently in the New Testament for that word love is because the New Testament writers are trying to make the point that God is a God who loves us as a father. His love for us doesn't change, doesn't alter. It's not conditioned or conditional. It's just freely given. And it's the same intensity no matter what. So that's agape. But in the end of John's Gospel, and in John's Gospel, friendship is a very important theme. And at the end of John's Gospel, Jesus says to Peter, "Do you agape me?" And Peter says, "Yeah." This is a very abridged version. And Jesus says to Peter again, "Do you agape me?" He says, "Yeah, of course I do. I do." And then on the final phrase, he says, "Do you phileo me?" Now, in our translation in English, it says, "Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me?" But in the original language, in the Greek, it doesn't say that. It says, "Do you abundantly love me?" Yes. "Do you abundantly love me?" Yes. "Are you my friend?" That's really what Jesus is saying to Peter. "Do you love me like I love you?" And he says, "Yeah." "Do I love you like you? Do you love me like I love you?" "Yeah." "Are you my friend?" Yeah. That's different from saying, I love you, I love you, I love you. It's more descriptive. And that phrase, friend, it also in John's Gospel takes you back to the upper room, doesn't it? Where Jesus says to them, I do not call you slaves any longer, but friends. You know, there's that sense that friendship is where sort of love rests. It's, you know, there's a completeness about it. There's a harmony. There's a harmony of lives. And what Jesus is saying to Peter in that is, I'm good with you. You good with me? And so the different words that we have for love can have an impact upon actually what's being said that doesn't really come across very accurately in English. So the word love is a bit bland, really, in that sense. Now, part of the problem is us coming from the West, those Greek terms get translated into Latin. So phileo, which is Greek for friend, brother, becomes amicitia. And that's friendship. And eros becomes Cupid. Or there's a phrase that you might know, concupiscence or cupitas. They're rooted to the same. Okay, bear that in mind because that's quite important. But the next word is what we translate from Greek into Latin, the word agape, and it translates as caritas. Yeah? And that is the root of our English word for charity, which we don't really associate with love today. But in the King James Bible, it says faith, hope, and charity. It doesn't say love, faith, hope, and charity. Charity is the highest form of love. But whatever you do, if you go to a charity shop, don't tell people you've been to a love shop, because they will be confused and surprised. See how slippy the words of love are? There you go. Anyway, but then there's the verb, isn't there? Amor. Yeah. Which is where we get the root for other things. But anyway, I just want to go back to Cupid, cupitas, concupiscence. And it's very much in the Latin West translated as a kind of self-interested love. And it's set alongside its opposite in Christian terms of caritas. So you have concupiscence or cupitas and caritas. Yeah. So in the Latin Bible, where it says the love of money is the root of all evil, that word love is cupitas, because it's a worldly thing. Now, I would say that in the modern world, we have, in what we would describe as classical or Christian terms, a rather distorted view of love. You see, love before the modern age was not so much about how you felt. I didn't mean to say that feelings didn't play a role. It wasn't so much about how you felt. It was about the good that you did. So, how is it in the New Testament that they can claim so emphatically God is love, and those who live in love live in God, and God lives in them? You hear it at every wedding. Now, the thing is when you look at the life of Jesus, did he please everybody? No. Was he nice to everybody? No. Did he give people what they wanted, and did he please himself? No. Did everything that he did good to people? Yes. And there's the key to what love is really about. It's about doing good. Now, the good that you may do may not be the good, it may not be what they want you to do. It may not be even something that they enjoy or like. For example, when Jesus was crucified, I'm not sure his family and those looking on thought that what was going on did anybody any good. But they didn't understand. I think for me, the cross says that true love is costly. It doesn't cost. It doesn't count the cost of oneself. It only measures it in terms of the good that it does others. And since God is infinitely good and infinite love, everything that he says and does for us is of infinite merit. And what the cross says to me is that true love costs. And true love involves sacrifice. Now, anybody with children knows that that's true. And that is the true nature of love. It's not about warm, fluffy feelings. It may be at certain times, but that's not what it's about. I'm not saying that when you're in love and that kind of, and your heart flutters and all that kind of stuff, and you feel that, and that's natural. But that's not what the foundation of love is. That's kind of an effect of love. But whether you feel those things or not doesn't change what love is. You may not feel it, but it doesn't mean to say it isn't there. And I think most people looking upon the cross didn't feel anything fluffy and warm. I think they saw something that was horrific and shocking, even though it was common. They would have seen it all the time. But that's what love is. It costs. And it's not just about self-gratification. It's about duty. And to do a duty of love is a joy. In the Eucharistic prayer, we say that, don't we? At the beginning, this is our duty and our joy. It's a way of celebrating what it is God has done for us. And in the sense, Eucharist, in a sense, it captures that kind of sense of love, of sharing. Everybody who sits down at the Lord's table, comes to the Lord's altar, is saying to Jesus, you're my friend and I'm your friend and I'm with you. That's what's happening in that moment. And there's an exchange of life. I give my life to you just as you give your life to me now. There's that continual unfolding of the generosity of God. I was surprised a few years ago to find out that the word prodigal, now I always thought prodigal meant lost or something like that. It doesn't. It means reckless. Reckless with one's things. The prodigal son. Reckless. God is prodigal with his love. And that's a key feature. And this is why I think that, for me, Christianity is the center of a kind of, that doesn't mean to say everybody doesn't experience love and have love. That doesn't mean that. But it means, but to say that God is love is quite a radical claim. That's not the same thing as saying God has love. God is love. That means to say the very being of God is love. And it always amazes me that we think of a God who is beyond time, space, and matter, and therefore is before all of those things. And yet we always look for God in the wrong places, don't we? You know, there's always some sort of scientific experiment or equation or some sort of thing that's designed for measuring and describing the universe. We kind of apply to God, and then when we don't find God there, we think, well, he's not there. You know, can't put God in a test tube, can't measure God, there's no equation for God. Well, all those things are kind of false tests. But I think the biggest area of exploration for the experience of God, the life of God, is in what we all know but can't contain. And that's love. Can't measure it. You only know it's there by its intensity. You can't put it in a test tube. There is no equation for love. There's no anything really. It cannot be described in the way that you describe a thing. It's beyond things. So there we go. There is my potted view of love. Now, what you do with that, I don't know. But I do think that we've gone a little bit too far in what you may call the indulgence or the emotionalization of love. No, it's all about what I feel. But actually, I think love is more to do with what we do. That's what we see in the New Testament. Now, Jesus certainly doesn't show the love of God in order to make people feel a certain way. He's only interested in doing for them in infinite good. Having said that, when you experience the good, there's power in goodness, isn't there? I think that's where we really find what the foundation of love is all about. The good, doing good. Anyway, those are my brief thoughts on love, and I could spend a lot longer. But what do you think? You can think on. Just to say, a little bit of a notice, heads up, that our sun has come down with a temperature. So if you do not see me on Sunday, do not be surprised, because it all depends whether we get the test back. That's a webinar for another day. NHS testing kids. Bye-bye.